Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. We're Performance Agile. I'm Eric.
And I'm Vince.
And today we're talking about Scrum.
Today's quote is another quote from Steve Jobs. He's quoted as saying, "If you look really closely, you'll see most overnight successes took a really long time."
So if you can't tell, I am very excited to talk about Scrum. Because Scrum,
He is.
Scrum, being a Scrum Master is what I did right out of college. It's the first job I've ever held in a professional enterprise capacity. So it's near and dear to my heart.
I was very proud of you.
But I gotta say, having worked as a Scrum Master for a couple of different companies now, there is still, for as big as it is, the 14th state of Agile was released just a couple of months ago, like right after we did the other video where we talked about State of the Agile.
Mm-hmm.
The next version has come out, and 58% roughly of all companies that are reported as doing Agile are still doing Scrum. Mm-hmm. So it's still a widely adopted framework, but still pretty misunderstood. So we're going to lay a general basic foundation for you, and then we might touch on some advanced topics on the back end of this video, but maybe like a couple of different scenarios that might help cement some Scrum understanding, some Scrum learning that you can take with you to your organization.
Okay.
So starting it off, Scrum is a framework.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Well, it is a process, if you will. When we say a framework, it embodies a group of activities to initiate and complete something, so that there is an organization to it, if you will. A flow is more appropriate, which was why they consider this to be a framework.
So, also noting that it is a framework, Scrum does not tell you how to build software. It does not mandate the use of test-driven development, behavior-driven development, feature-driven development. It doesn't mandate any of these things. As a framework, Scrum just says, hey, here's some activities we think you should do, some meetings, some ceremonies, some events. Here are some artifacts that you and your team should have. And, every week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks after your iteration ends, you should stop, you should inspect and adapt. Use the empirical evidence you have to make your teams more efficient and increase the general well-being of the team and like the developers or the delivery individuals on that team.
Okay.
So what we're going to talk about, iterative incremental development and what that means. What does that mean?
What does that mean? Well, when we talk about Scrum, we're talking about, you'll hear the words cadence in association with sprints. What that means is an iterative process is a cyclical repeating process, and that's what Scrum is. So when we say that, you may have heard of plan, do, check, act. PCDA is a forerunner to the Scrum cyclical cycle, where you design, you develop, you test, and you repeat that. Rather, instead of months, you're doing it in days, literal days, hours within days, even in some cases. So that is a very cyclical, repeatable, short time frame where we are constantly refining that process for improvement. So that is an iterative process. The Scrum creators refer to that as a sprint. Though you can go to the Scrum Alliance, you can go to scrum.org, and they will also say that, this is an iterative process. So they use that word in their vernacular.
Yeah. Time box, iteration, iterative, sprint. They're all used rather
cadence
interchangeably.
Yes.
So you have five words all saying the same thing, is that you're taking a chunk of time, whether it's 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or 4 weeks. Like the Scrum guide on scrum.org says anywhere from 1 to 4 weeks, and you're saying, okay, we're going to start and then we're going to have an end date, and we're going to develop something in the interim. However long that interim looks like, that is your sprint, your cadence, your time box, your iteration.
That's exactly right. So now what we're going to talk about is, while we're doing things iteratively, we're going to deliver incrementally. So we want to provide value to our customer at the end of every sprint. So if our cadence is every 2 weeks, that's going to be our time box, right? Our cadence. So our sprint cycle is every 2 weeks, hypothetically. We want to, at the end of every 2 weeks, we want to deliver some value, right? That's one of the fundamental, foundational things that all of these frameworks want you to adhere to, live up to, if you will. As an incremental aspect, so we're giving you something that you can use. It's not everything that you wanted, but it is something of value that you can use. So the next sprint, we're going to work on something that provides more value, that adds to what we've already given you. So we're building over time with each delivery. We're incrementally increasing value to you and through this iterative process. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now that we've covered really high level, basically what the framework is, and at the very core of the framework is the iterative and incremental fundamental philosophy of how this framework ticks, if you will. We're going to cover more aspects of what is within the framework. So let's start by revisiting the roles. As a reminder, we did cover the roles separately for a reason in greater detail, but we still should probably revisit it. What are those roles?
Sure. So one of the caveats to this whole conversation is that we are taking this Scrum approach as a single team operation because the current Scrum framework has been acknowledged to only scale to 2 teams at max. So when we say the team, we're talking the little team. We're talking just the developers, the requirements writers, the analysts, the QA, QE folks, the quality assurance, quality engineers who might be on the team, as it were. Mm-hmm. So with that in mind, the roles that we're talking about are the Scrum Master, the team level coach who's going to help facilitate team learning of Scrum to both the product owner, the little team, and the organization that the team is supporting. We have the product owner. The product owner is the individual who's responsible for the product backlog, ensuring that everything's prioritized, groomed, well understood, ready to go for a sprint. Mm-hmm. And then the development team or the delivery team, who is going to be the ones that are out there doing the work, turning the wrenches, writing the code, delivering the value that you mentioned in an incremental fashion.
Correct. All right, so now that we've covered the roles, let's briefly cover some of the ceremonies, because what we've just decided is, right here on the fly, you've witnessed this almost live, is we've decided to break out some of these ceremonies into future sessions. We've already have planning already separated out because it will take too much time to do it all today. So we're going to take some of these other ceremonies and we're also going to split them out. But again, while we're talking about Scrum as a framework, these are in the framework. So why don't you go ahead and just list those out for us? Sure.
So I think the one that everyone's going to be most familiar with right off the bat, the daily stand-up. Now, the daily stand-up or the daily Scrum is a 15-minute meeting max. People will say it is a time-boxed 15-minute meeting, in which case you will stand for the entire duration of that meeting, like we are standing right now. It is to keep people engaged, to keep people focused, to keep people driven to meeting conclusion, because nobody likes standing for a long period of time. So you get in, you have your conversation, and you get out, you get back to work. Mm-hmm. And it is not a status meeting. It is a team meeting to say, hey, here's what I'm working on. Here's where I'm running into trouble. Here's where I need help. Can anyone help me? How can I help others? It's to drive team level conversation about how they can help each other, how they can make each other better. It's not the Scrum Master saying, okay, well, what percent are you done with your work? Or the product owner saying, okay, well, what percent are you done with your work? It's not supposed to be like that. It's supposed to be an organic, just conversation amongst team members to try to figure out how they can work with each other to make things more efficient.
15 minutes or less.
Right.
So, what else?
Another one that everyone might be familiar with is the retrospective. What this really just means is you take a couple of hours or a full day, depending on how long your iteration is, to stop. You inspect on what you've just delivered over the last 2, 3, 4 weeks or week, however long it was, and you say, what went well, what didn't go well, and basically what can we do better. You're just reflecting on what everything you've just accomplished. You're really trying to strive for the most process improvements that you can, whether they're small wins, big wins. But you can also even put some of these necessary changes in the backlog if they're really big enough. If you're saying, hey, this whole team process, it's so large to fix that it's going to require so much time and effort. That is something that the team can work on over time. It's not something that has to be done on the spot.
Right.
Now, the next 3 are all sprint related, right? You have sprint planning, sprint review, and the backlog refinement. So the backlog, starting that off first. Again, it is the list of all items that the product owner is going to own and prioritize that delivers the most business value to the customer. And we did talk about that a little bit more in the product owner video. So if you need more, go check it out there.
It's also an artifact that we'll be covering in a second. But, right.
But when you have a prioritized, groomed, and estimated backlog, you need that to facilitate the sprint planning meeting, because you can't plan a sprint if nobody knows what the work is, if nobody can really understand what the weighted estimates of that work are going to be, like a generally rough sense of how long or how big or how complex that these work items are going to take. If I say, build me the Coliseum, and the estimate would be a few years, but if you're like, we can get that done in 2 weeks, you're setting everybody up for failure. So you need to have those conversations in that refinement meeting to facilitate a sprint planning meeting.
Yeah, I have run across where some have thought that the backlog refinement is for the product owner. It is not for the product owner at all.
It's for the team.
It's for the team, because if the team doesn't understand what they're working on, and they don't have the opportunity to voice their concerns, about potential risks, or you want us to do this? Well, we think we're going to be blocked because. Why would we want to take that into the sprint, not knowing anything about it, and then we go to work on it and we go, we can't do that. That's crazy. So that's why we do refinement, so that we're properly prepared to work in the sprint. So good.
So then the last sprint related meeting outside of sprint planning, product backlog refinement, and the retrospective is the sprint review. Now, some people get the sprint review and the sprint retrospective conflated or mixed or swapped. Now, the sprint review is supposed to be a demo of all value created to the product owner, for the product owner to say, yes, this is what we wanted, because the product owner, again, is supposed to be representing the voice of the customer, representing the needs of the customer. So the product owner should have a really good idea of what was, the value that was delivered, if it meets the needs of the customer. So we do this demo to the product owner, and we say, hey, here's what we delivered. Is this what you wanted? And the product owner is going to give you a thumbs up, thumbs down, gladiator style, and say, yep, this is great. Or no, we kind of missed the mark. We need to do maybe a change of course. But the nice thing about the sprint review is that it allows you to catch things early. 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, okay, you can lose that, and maybe it'll set you back a little. But if you deliver the wrong thing and you wait for a year to get that feedback on, hey, here's what we delivered for you. Is this what you wanted? Well, rather catch it sooner rather than later. So having these reviews where you're constantly demoing the value you're delivering in an incremental fashion is going to allow you to catch gaps, mistakes, bugs so much sooner.
So that's pretty much the textbook explanation of the sprint review. I'm going to give you a little teaser because we're going to cue this one up again in the next video for when we talk about ceremonies. This has evolved. It's gotten even better and smarter. So there's an even better way to conduct these sprint reviews. And so we're going to explain that. That's our teaser to get you into that next video. So, all right, what's left? The only one that's left is sprint planning, and we are definitely going to cover that in great detail in another video.
Yeah,
because that is just so important. And so we're going to talk about all of it.
Yeah,
right.
You're going to hear some terms like velocity, capacity, and you might be wondering, well, what the heck does all that mean? And velocity as a concept of itself, we could spend easily an hour talking about just that. So yeah, if that's something you're really looking forward to, please find it on the planning video when we make it.
Absolutely.
But we want to talk about artifacts.
Yeah, let's talk about the artifacts very briefly.
All right, very briefly, the artifacts. There's 3 main ones, and then a 4th one that's not really written down, but it's inherently implied within the guide. So the 3 ones that are written down is the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the product increment. So breaking those down really quick, the product backlog, again, it's the full list of all things that will eventually be developed for the product that delivers value to the customer, maintained by the product owner. The sprint backlog is the subset of all of those prioritized estimated items that are going to be delivered in the sprint. Yes? Do you want to add anything more to that?
Maybe a little bit. So a fundamental difference between the product backlog and the sprint backlog is that the product backlog is owned by the product owner. No debate. When sprint planning is concluded, and as part of sprint planning, the team agrees, as in like a almost a contract, if you will, a verbal agreement. We're going to do these things, and we're going to complete these things in this sprint. That sprint backlog is owned entirely by the team and no one else. There is no debate. So no one messes with that sprint backlog once the team starts that sprint. So I just want to draw that out. Again, we'll probably talk about that in more detail, but that is a very distinct difference between those 2 backlogs and who owns them.
Yeah.
Okay, so go ahead.
Good call, thank you. And then the last written one is the product increment. So as you said, the sprint backlog is going to be what the team says is this is what we're going to be able to work on during the sprint. The outcome of that would be the increment, right? So again, Scrum being the incremental iterative framework that it is, well, at the end of your sprint, 2, 3, 4 weeks, whatever it is, you want to deliver value. Well, that value is the product increment. That's just another name for the value you're delivering. But this is what is going to say, you're going to show your customer, hey, this is what we built for you. Is it of value?
Right. And
the conversation around value gets a little hazy because some people might be thinking, oh, it's got to be a brand new feature, an entire, if you're thinking Microsoft Word, it's a new ribbon or a new toolbar or a new, maybe like a whole formatting or paragraph indentation system. That's not necessarily the case. Value is going to be inherently driven by the customer. So what's of value to me is not necessarily what's of value to him. So having that close relationship with your customers, with your clients, is going to be really crucial to determine what value is and are you delivering it to them.
Yeah, you are watching this real time. Maybe we should devote another video to just what value is.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think we should do that. See, look at us. We're refining our backlog as we go. So one of the other things with regard to the term product increment, some of you may run across PSI, potentially shippable increment. It really means the same thing, where product increment implies that it really is something of value that we're going to incrementally deliver. The potentially shippable increment, I think, is the lawyered up version of that for very complex products where, you can do 4-week sprints still even, right? So you're taking up the entire sprint in a month, and you're still not really able to deploy anything of value, right? So potentially shippable increment. And let's face it, folks, not everything is this simple, right? We would all love it to be that simple, but there are just some things that are really very complex. And when you're working in a very large organization, in a very old, with a lot of systems, a lot of interfaces, and you're trying to refactor and remodernize a lot of these things, let's just be honest. Hence the quote, which is what led me to the quote at the beginning of the session. Most overnight successes, well, it turns out they took a really long time. And don't be fooled by the simplicity of the Scrum framework, because a lot of people, when we talked about misunderstandings, is that it's some silver bullet. That Agile is a silver bullet, and Scrum is the gunpowder in that bullet, right? That's not true. Let's just call it out. Yes, if we're doing 1-week sprints or 4-week sprints, regardless, ideally, do we want to be able to complete something and deliver it and have some value to someone? Yes. In a perfect world, we do. But in all cases, I don't want you to feel like you failed or your team is not producing or performing badly because they might be 2 or 3 or 4 sprints into what they're working on, and they've completed work, but there's still nothing that the user can actually get their hands on and use of value. So just want to call that out. It's not always that simple, but yeah, and fundamentally that is the goal.
Right. So the fourth artifact that is kind of inherent to the guide, but it's not explicitly written, is the sprint goal. So I've seen this kind of evolve and take its own shape over time, but whenever you create a sprint backlog, the team creates their own sprint backlog to say, this is what we think we will be able to do in the sprint based on whatever team metric that they're using. And we're going to talk about Scrum metrics in an upcoming session here, like velocity, capacity, t-shirt sizing, story points, you name it, we're going to cover it. But the sprint goal is saying, we're at point A and we're trying to get to point B. How do we get there? Sprint backlog. But this takes us into a little bit more of a deeper conversation around production bugs. Production bugs, they happen. They do. Something will come up in the middle of the sprint. You're at day 5 out of day 10 in your 2-week sprint, and your production management team comes screaming down the hall saying, we got a showstopper, severity 1, everything's down, we're going to break our SLAs, customers are losing millions of dollars. How do you get your team when they've agreed to everything in the sprint? Mm-hmm. How do you work within that framework? What do you do? How do you manage that? The world's on fire. How do you put it out?
Are you asking me?
I'm asking you.
Well, that is another aspect of planning that we're going to talk about. You want to, what's the word I'm looking for? When we implement this framework, one of the core aspects of these frameworks is predictability and sustainability. And what I mean by sustainability is not sustaining the product in production. Sustainability is to the health and welfare of the team doing the work.
Yeah.
So that we don't overwhelm them, we don't burden them, we don't allow them to overcommit, we don't allow external forces to dump on them. It's a very sustainable pace. That's the sustainable pace provides that predictability to everyone upstream left of development, right? So that being said, there's and we talked about the intake process in our product delivery model. Mm-hmm. All of those hot burning things, especially the emergency defects that are found in production, there needs to be a well-established flow of change management for that into that product backlog. So they are now competing with all of the business requests that are new and all of the operations and business requests from things in production. So the two actually marry up, they meet up by whatever process you design and implement, they meet up at that product backlog. So there's unless you have a separate team working on just that stuff, and it should still be a similar flow. But yeah, no, there is not a, you got this backlog team and give me 10% of this, and oh, you've got this backlog and give me, give me the rest of your time on this. I have seen it done that way.
And it's
you
ugly.
will devote, like 15% of your sprint to legacy defects. And just let me add on that folks, if you've got that many defects in production, it better be before you implemented any of these Agile frameworks, and you're now catching up on your waterfall legacy problems, because these frameworks and these processes are meant to increase quality and lower your defect rate. And we are going to, in more detail, talk about that in other videos. We don't want to waste any more time talking about it, because we've kicked that horse already a little bit too much, I think. So continue.
Yeah.
Yeah. So roll it up.
So left to right, if we're looking at the Scrum framework, the picture that is provided by scrum.org here, you have a product backlog which feeds into a sprint planning ceremony, which feeds the sprint backlog artifact, which the team picks up, works through 24 hours. They have their daily Scrum. The start of their sprint, they have their sprint planning. At the end of the sprint, they have their sprint review. And if you see on the photo, there's a big arrow that brings it back around, because we're
going to put the graphic up for them.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to put the graphic up, but it's incremental. We're just it's driving home that this is not a one and done situation. This is a continual thing until the product that you're delivering for
iterating and incrementally delivering. Iterate, incrementally deliver.
Right, and you're going to do this until they sunset that product line.
Mm-hmm.
You're saying we're done. We're not even maintaining it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It is dead in the water. We're saying it's last goodbyes. You're pulling the plug on the server. Whatever you're doing, this is a framework that says this is the support structure around it until you decide to do something else with that product line.
Correct. That's Scrum in a nutshell.
That's Scrum in a nutshell. That's great.
So hopefully, if you have any questions on what we just said, if you have any disagreements or debates on what it is that we just said, please leave your comments. We'd love to hear it, and we'll come back and readdress anything that is absolutely worthy of revisiting. I'd be happy to do that. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to covering some of these other things in detail, or we would be here all night, and we are standing, to his point. So, right. You get used to that 15-minute stand up, you don't like to stand up for too long. So, I think that's it.
Well, that's it, folks. Thanks for joining us on another video. We hope you enjoyed it. And if you like what we do here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, leave a comment, turn on notifications so you get all of our videos as they are released. And if you really like what we do here, share it with your friends and family. But other than that, I think we're done, and we'll catch you in the next video.